Since the arrival of Europeans in North America, firearms have been a crucial and celebrated part of Canadian life. From becoming essential to hunt and eventually adopted by Indigenous people, firearms are part of a tradition that has lasted in Canada and still exists to this very day. A lot of people in cities cannot conceptualize why a firearm would be necessary, not realizing there are swaths of Canadians across the country from west to east and north to south who use firearms to feed themselves and their families, who use them as a hobby, who use them also for protection. Rural crime continues to be on the rise. Police response times are sometimes in the hours. Using a firearm in self-defense is legal in Canada, and this has been demonstrated in court decision after court decision after court decision. Although that doesn't mean that those who are involved in tragic situations where they need to do such a thing do not have to defend themselves and prove that point time and time again. One such person is Eddie Maurice in Alberta. In 2018, he was at his home outside Okotoks when he heard someone on his property, quite a rare phenomenon for that part of the province, and went to check it out.
Basically just opened that door and then I seen the criminals that were inside my vehicle and I just started yelling at them to leave. And they weren't. They were still going about just stealing my stuff. So, you know, at that point, that's when you're just like, okay, what do you do? How do you handle it? You know, my first inclination is, I was home by myself with my youngest daughter, you know, grab a firearm because I don't know who's here, what's happening, and get them off my property, you know, one of those things, split-second decisions.
And what did you do?
So that's when I fired a warning shot off, you know, into the ground where it's safe operation of it. And then they finally did take off after they realized, like, you know, I'm there and they need to leave.
The bullet ricocheted and hit the criminal. Eddie Maurice was charged with aggravated assault and careless use of a firearm. Charges it took tens of thousands of dollars, 6 months, and 6 court appearances to defeat. He was successful. Although that didn't stop him from having to shell out the legal bills, it also didn't stop police from, for a time, suspending his firearms license and seizing his firearms.
You know, when you're in the middle of nowhere and it's pitch black outside, you know, people don't understand that you can't see anything, you can't hear anything, and you don't know, is there 2, 6, 10 people around your place? So, no, it's one of those, you have it, I don't want to use it, but you got to scare someone, like, because nowadays criminals, you know, you hear the stories, they're always armed, they have weapons, they're hurting other people.
Why not just call the police?
Well, I did. And, you know, the response time, you know, they didn't show up on my property for 2 hours. So what do you want to do for 2 hours is kind of sit on the couch, wait, hopefully no one comes to the house, they just touch your vehicles and walk away. You know, it's all those unknowns of what's going to happen. And when you're in a rural setting, I guess a lot of people in the city or towns, they don't understand. It's not only the police response, but you're the first responder for any emergency on your place. You know, if you have a fire, well, the response time for the fire department is going to be the exact same as the police. So what are you going to do for an hour? Is let your house burn, or are you going to try to help put it out and then, you know, wait for them to show up to help you? When the situation happens, you're talking seconds to minutes. You're not talking enough time to call the cops to get them to come out to your place.
As Eddie mentioned, it took the RCMP 2 hours from the 911 call to arrive. And when they did, they weren't exactly there to help.
It was 3 cop cars driving in. I just assumed that they were coming here to tell me, hey, we caught them, so forth, you know, is everything okay? They actually pulled up, they got out, they had their guns drawn, and it was pretty much, I opened the front door and they're like, you're under arrest and you need to come with us.
This rural-urban divide is one of the biggest issues in the firearms discourse. People in cities are making these decisions to win the votes of other people in cities who have never touched a firearm in their life and may not have ever met a firearms owner in their life. Nonetheless, these problems that exist for rural Canadians and the cultural attitudes towards firearms exist. It isn't just farmers and ranchers who have firearms as a part of their existence and identity, however. John Banovich is a longtime member of the film industry. He's a documentary producer and videographer who specializes in shooting bears. No, not shooting them with firearms, shooting them with this much more beautiful weapon, his camera. He goes deep into the wilderness to film Canada's nature and splendor and beauty. But doing so, as he admits, sometimes brings some unpredictability.
We get to these remote locations. There isn't any cell service. There isn't internet. It's very remote. I mean, yes, you can usually have a GPS transponder of some kind for emergencies and press a button and hopefully somebody comes in a day or two, but it's not quick response at all. So there's very little support at all for us once we're in these remote locations. We bring along measures like, bells, and we can set up a parameter on camp. So when we're sleeping at night, there's some simple methods that we can use to at least warn us. We bring bear spray, although bear spray is, for the most part, relatively ineffective. In perfect conditions, sure, but this is Canada. There's always a wind, there's always rain, there's always snow, there's always weather conditions which really hamper the effectiveness of bear spray. Firearms are our most efficient and effective tool.
For the longest time, John had what's known as an authorization to carry, or an ATC, a rare but legal permit allowing him to carry a handgun on his person for limited purposes, such as going out into the bush where you are your best and only line of defense. Shortly after the Liberals came to power, however, the government made it more and more difficult for people to get ATCs, including renewals for people like John who had had them for years.
It is virtually impossible to get an ATC anymore. So now we've had to default to something much bigger, much heavier, much slower, less effective, carrying a shotgun on my back. And if you can imagine having this camera on my shoulder and carrying this tripod on the other side of my body under my arm and wearing a shotgun on my back. Now, wildlife encounters, especially bears and cougars, they don't happen at great distances. For example, I'm not going to see the cougar coming from 100 meters away. It's going to know about me long before I know about it. Usually there's surprise encounters and they're in a very short range, a very short distance, which does not give me much time to respond.
You may think, well, what's the big deal? He's still allowed to carry a gun, just not his handgun. What's wrong with having a shotgun? Well, John demonstrated, without the firearms mind you, the difference between how he would respond to an impending animal attack with a shotgun versus with the handgun he had been allowed to carry for years without issue.
Now, I've got a shotgun back here. It's getting tangled up in my tripod and in my long lens. It's getting tangled up. Even if I wear it across my back, right diagonally, it's still, when I drop this, it's going to get tangled up. So, there's a bear. Drop the tripod. Now I've got to get both hands out here and, chamber around and get ready. Versus the other method, the old method, the more efficient method, which is bear. Can you see the difference? Holy cow. Right? I mean, I go home. I get to go home to my family versus, now that bear's had several more seconds to get on me.
In the bush, that difference of a couple of seconds can be the difference between life and death. John doesn't want to hurt animals, but he wants to be able to protect himself when he's at work capturing the beauty of the Canadian wilderness. The government doesn't seem to care.
They're punishing me, a law-abiding firearm owner. They're punishing me for trying to do my job. I would think that they'd want to support me because I pay taxes, and wouldn't they want to collect my taxes? Just saying. I mean, that's one way to fund our national debt, is to have people working and supporting themselves and not being a burden to the system, but actually providing to the system. After all, I mean, I'm a Canadian, I pay taxes, that makes me part of the government, from a logical standpoint. So I would hope that they would see the benefit in this, allowing me to do my job and allowing me to do my job safely. And I want to go home at the end of my workday, just like a police officer and just like anyone else. I'm sure all those politicians in Ottawa, they want to go home too at the end of their day, and they want to go home and be safe and spend time with their family. I'm no different.
An aspect of gun culture that's often overlooked is civilian ownership of non-civilians, people in the armed forces, veterans, active or retired police officers. One of those is Ryan Steacy, a veteran of the Canadian Armed Forces who now consults on firearms for film. He was the armorer on the film The Revenant, which starred Leonardo DiCaprio. Ryan Steacy, while a member of the Canadian Armed Forces, fought on the shooting team around the world, including winning the coveted Bisley tournament in the United Kingdom. He continued competing after he left the armed forces.
The military guys are shooting C7, but the reality of the civilian side is the AR-15 is probably the most accurate platform out there, and it's really the only one that can put you at the top for those elite level scores. And accuracy, because it is an accuracy game.
Ryan Steacy's competition firearm is, or was, the AR-15. A popular, albeit misunderstood, semi-automatic firearm made for the civilian market specifically. It's lightweight and customizable, and now prohibited in Canada. Justin Trudeau's May 2020 order in council made it illegal to transport, fire, or sell AR-15s, meaning Ryan can no longer compete using the firearm that has won him medals and trophies around the world.
Now I can take it out of my safe, oogle it and drool on it, and then put it back in the safe. This is the first light that it's seen since May, because I can't even take it and practice with it anymore.
Despite the federal government's promise of a buyback program, nothing has yet materialized, even though in May 2022, less than a year from now, the 2-year amnesty period is set to expire. Nevertheless, the promise to give gun owners some compensation for seizing their property is cold comfort to Ryan.
I would ask the government how much this AR-15 is worth. It's won 16 or 17 provincial championships. It's won 6 national championships in a row. It's set almost every record on the books in the DCRA. And how much are they going to give me for it? It's a piece of Canadian history. Is it going to be $800? $1,300? What's fair for a piece of Canadian history? And it's going to sound kind of hokey, but it probably should be in a museum somewhere at some point in the future, because it's done something that no other AR-15 has ever done in Canadian history and service rifle history. It's won 6 national championships in a row, and it's set the highest score ever shot. I don't know. What are they going to give me for it? What's fair?
It's a valid question, and one the government isn't answering. Ryan's time on the Canadian Armed Forces competitive shooting team made him a better soldier, he says. But he needed to supplement his military training with private practice as a licensed gun owner.
Obviously, shoot, move, and communicate. Shoot is the first one, so you're not a viable soldier. You're not effective unless you can shoot. Now, there's shooting and there's actual shooting. So I wanted to achieve the actual shooting, which was far beyond just your basic, personal weapons test qualifications and your 80 rounds a year or whatever it is to make you qualified, which is a joke. Even being on a military shooting team, there was just not enough practice to make you that elite level shooter that I wanted to be at. So for me, having my own AR-15 was 100% a massive factor of getting to that level. So I had to put down a lot of time and money and my own, all my own stuff to get to that elite level. So when I got out of the military, I thought, well, I can't give this up because I'm sort of at that level and I want to keep it going.
Even after speaking with numerous gun owners about the effect of the Order in Council on their lives, Ryan shared a concern I hadn't heard before. One that, quite frankly, shocked me.
I do worry about the military folks as well, because it will come back to bite us in the ass at some point overseas. Yeah, I know for a fact that there were guys that shot on military shooting teams that may or may not have survived some of the contacts that they had overseas in Afghanistan if they weren't able to deploy the tactics and skills that they had learned shooting in service rifle competitions in particular. When we started getting ready for the OIC, I collected a lot of thoughts from guys that had shot on shooting teams, but it also served overseas. And my basic question was, did what you learn on the shooting teams help you overseas, shooting service rifle, help you overseas during conflict? And I have a pile of letters from guys that say exactly that same thing. That, yeah, 100%, absolutely.
When the government and the media take aim at the AR-15 and try to link that model of firearm with gun violence, they're maligning law-abiding sport shooters, many of whom are active or former members of the Canadian Armed Forces.
Yeah, they do say get another hobby, but I will tell you that this is not a hobby for a lot of us. For the people that are in the military, it's part of their life. That portion of their life could go on to help them save their own lives or somebody else's life overseas in combat. For the civilian shooters, this isn't a hobby. We were born to shoot service rifle and to do these things. Me in particular, I think really that's my calling, is to shoot at an elite level and to teach people to shoot at an elite level. And it's more than just a hobby. Like when I go back to Ottawa to shoot at nationals, I go to see my other family, basically. The guys and girls that I don't get to see for a year. You know, we're all camped in the same houses and in the same area, and you know, there's a mess there, so there's always that community that, you know, you come together once a year and you trade your stories and you see everybody and you compete, and it's pretty awesome to be amongst people that are of the same mindset as you are. It's so much more than the shooting that's been taken away. Yeah, it's just hard to fathom that the government has done this. Supposedly it's not affecting sport shooters. Well, I can tell you that it is. It's affecting a lot of people, a lot more than what they say. So it's pretty tough. Like, we're just regular people that go out and have this as part of our being. So yeah, it sucks that it's been taken away from everybody just for no reason. To get votes, really, is really what it comes down to.
When I set out on this project earlier this year, I expected what I'd find would be a group of Canadians who are dejected, discouraged, and demoralized. After all, they have good reason to be. Something they've invested tens of thousands of dollars, years of their life into, is being vilified and maligned by the government. Well, certainly I encountered a lot of frustration and in some cases anger. I also saw a great deal of resilience. Whether it was the competition shooter, the mom-and-pop gun store owner, or anyone else who fits into this rich tapestry of firearms ownership in Canada, what I saw from these folks was a sense of community and a sense of resilience. They're not going to take an order in council or a ham-fisted bill like C-21 lying down. They're going to stand up and they're going to say, no, we are a part of this country and we have every right to be heard and every right to exist. As Rod Giltaca said, they're not seeking anything more than being left alone.
Well, it's not a hobby. It's a culture. You know, it's a lifestyle. It's our identity. There are a lot of cultures and a lot of identities that I don't identify with, that I don't see value in. But never do I think, you know what, if those people just evaporated, that would be fine with me. I couldn't care less, or I'd really like to see the government really crush them. This is a problem, and this is why, despite our political adversaries saying this isn't dividing Canadians, you're dividing Canadians for making a big deal about it. It's like, no, the government is dividing Canadians in a time where division is out of control. You have Canadians sitting back right now, maybe even watching this, that would think, yeah, I have no problem with the police using force, breaking the doors of the homes of gun owners down with a ram and taking their things, because I don't own any guns and I don't know why anyone would own guns. We've owned guns for hundreds of years in Canada for good and sufficient reasons. And, you know, people need to start thinking about those things before they cheerlead the government using force against an identifiable group of Canadians.
More importantly, gun owners in this country are enjoying and embracing the fact that they're partaking in a hobby and a sport that is immensely normal. And it's brought them together with people from all walks of life, from all corners of the country, And that is what gun ownership is in Canada. It's not about criminality, it's not about extremism, it's about community and passion. Thank you so much for watching.